Grace Whittaker had believed in the life she and Marcus Ellison built, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city, filled with promises as dazzling as the skyline. But when the man who vowed to be her future boarded a private jet for a business trip, Grace was left standing in their marble foyer with a secret of her own, a truth that would shatter their perfect world. She didn't know then that his destination wasn't a boardroom, but a sun-drenched beach with another woman. She couldn't have imagined that her quiet heartbreak would soon become a public spectacle, or that their eventual reunion at a glittering gala would be not an ending, but a stunning, impossible new beginning, played out before a world that was watching their every move. The silence in the penthouse was a physical thing. It pressed in on Grace Whittaker, amplifying the faint, rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from Marcus's parents, its pendulum swinging with a relentless, indifferent calm. It was the same calm Marcus had worn just an hour ago, kissing her goodbye. His lips were cool, his embrace brief, the scent of his expensive cologne already fading from the air. "It's just a few days, Gracie," he'd murmured, his hand resting for a fleeting moment on the small of her back. "The deal in Singapore won't close itself," she had nodded, forcing a smile that felt brittle on her lips. "I know. Be safe." Now she stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a ghostly silhouette against the sprawling tapestry of city lights. Below, the world hummed with life, a vibrant, chaotic dance of headlights and neon. Up here, in their glass castle, it was sterile and still. For months, this stillness had felt less like peace and more like absence. Marcus was always leaving. Singapore, London, Dubai, the destinations blurred into a single, recurring theme of his departure. He was the CEO of Ellison Holdings, a man whose ambition was as vast and gleaming as the skyscrapers his company erected. Grace had once admired that drive, had seen it as part of the magnetic force that had drawn her to him. Now, it just felt like distance. Her hand drifted to her stomach, a gesture that had become unconscious over the past few weeks. A flutter of anxiety, or perhaps something more, stirred within her. She'd been feeling off, a persistent fatigue she'd blamed on stress, a faint nausea she'd dismissed as a side effect of her changing sleep schedule, always trying to align with whatever time zone Marcus was in. But this morning, the feeling had been undeniable. She turned from the window and walked back through the cavernous living room, her bare feet silent on the polished Italian marble. The space was a monument to modern minimalism, all clean lines and neutral tones curated by a designer Marcus had hired. It was beautiful, impeccable, and felt about as personal as a luxury hotel lobby. Her own touches, a stack of worn paperbacks on a side table, a colourful throw blanket she'd bought at a street market, seemed like small defiant acts of clutter. In the master bathroom, another temple of marble and chrome, she found the box she'd hidden at the back of a vanity drawer, tucked beneath a collection of bath bombs she never used. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. Her hands trembled as she opened the package, the plastic crinkling with exaggerated loudness in the quiet room. The instructions were simple, clinical. She followed them with a detached precision, her mind a strange mix of numb and hyper-aware. She noticed a smudge on the mirror, the way a drop of water clung to the edge of the chrome faucet, the faint scent of lavender from the hand soap. Anything to distract from the 2 minutes that stretched into an eternity. She placed the test on the cool marble counter, face down, and paced the length of the bathroom. 1 minute. She thought of Marcus, already in the air, sipping champagne in his first-class seat, his phone switched off. He'd be scrolling through financial reports on his tablet, his brow furrowed in concentration. He wouldn't be thinking of her. Not really. He was in his world, and she was in hers. 2 minutes. With a deep, shuddering breath, she reached out and flipped it over. 2 pink lines, bold, clear, and unequivocal. Pregnant. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the edge of the counter for support. A sound escaped her lips. Not a cry, not a gasp, but something in between. A raw, involuntary noise of shock. Her mind raced, a chaotic flood of emotions. There was a surge of pure, unadulterated joy, a primal, protective instinct that bloomed in her chest, warm and fierce. A baby. Their baby. But hot on its heels came a chilling wave of fear. This was supposed to be a moment they shared. She imagined telling him, seeing the surprise, and then the slow, dazzling smile spread across his face. She pictured his strong hands on her belly, the two of them whispering names and dreams into the quiet of the night. But he wasn't here. And suddenly, his absence felt less like a necessity of his job, and more like a profound, gaping wound. She sank onto the cold floor, the pregnancy test still clutched in her hand. The city lights outside seemed to mock her, their brilliance cold and distant. She was pregnant. She was alone. And a tiny, insidious seed of doubt, one she had been trying to ignore for months, began to sprout in the fertile ground of her solitude. The late-night calls he didn't answer, the credit card statements with charges from restaurants she'd never heard of, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirt that one time. She had explained it all away. She had trusted him. But as she sat on the cold marble floor of their perfect home, with the proof of a new life in her hand, the truth of her own life began to come into focus, sharp and painful. The deal in Singapore. Was it real? Or was it just another beautiful, carefully constructed lie in the house of glass they had built? The silence of the penthouse no longer felt empty. It felt heavy, weighted with the secrets it held. And for the first time, Grace Whittaker allowed herself to wonder if she was not the queen of this castle, but its prisoner. The Maldivian sun was a warm, liquid gold, spilling over the turquoise expanse of the Indian Ocean. From the deck of their private overwater bungalow, the world seemed stripped down to its most perfect elements: sun, sea, and sky. Marcus Ellison leaned back in his lounge chair, a glass of chilled champagne sweating in his hand, and watched Lena Hart emerge from the infinity pool. Water streamed from her lithe, tanned body, her black bikini a stark, stunning contrast against her skin. She was magnificent, a creature of pure, unapologetic confidence. She ran a hand through her wet, dark hair, slicking it back from her face, and smiled at him. It was a smile that held both a challenge and a promise, a smile that had captivated him from the moment he'd first seen her across a crowded boardroom 6 months ago. "Tired of the view already, Marcus?" she teased, her voice a low, husky purr. She settled onto the lounge chair beside him, her skin radiating heat. "Never," he said, his eyes tracing the curve of her hip. He reached out, his fingers brushing a drop of water from her shoulder. "This is perfect." And it was. This was the escape he'd craved. Away from the relentless pressure of the board, the endless meetings, the suffocating weight of expectation. Away from the quiet, unspoken questions in Grace's eyes. Here, with Lena, everything was simple. Their relationship was a transaction, clean and thrilling. She wasn't looking for forever. She was looking for opportunity. She was an ambitious art consultant who understood that proximity to power was its own form of currency. He admired her for it. There were no messy emotions, no complicated history. There was only the now, To us, Lena said, raising her own glass of champagne, and to closing big deals. She winked, a playful acknowledgement of the lie he'd told his wife. He clinked his glass against hers. To Singapore, he replied, the lie tasting like expensive champagne on his tongue. A flicker of guilt, brief and unwelcome, pricked at him. He pushed it away. He deserved this. He worked harder than anyone he knew. He provided Grace with a life of unimaginable luxury, a life she seemed perfectly content with. What she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. It was a mantra he'd repeated to himself so many times it had started to feel like truth. He'd met Grace in college, when he was just a guy with a famous last name and a chip on his shoulder, desperate to prove he was more than his father's son. She had been brilliant, warm, and grounded. She'd seen him, not his potential net worth. She had been his anchor. But as his empire grew, he had started to feel the anchor as a weight, holding him in place while the rest of the world spun in a dizzying orbit of power, risk, and temptation. Lena was the opposite of an anchor. She was a rocket. Being with her was a jolt of adrenaline, a reminder of the man he was in the boardroom, decisive, powerful, and in control. I was thinking, Lena said, setting her glass down and turning to face him, her expression turning serious, about the new Ellison Tower downtown. The lobby is a huge space. It needs a statement piece, something monumental. Marcus felt a familiar shift inside him, the pleasant buzz of the champagne giving way to the sharper focus of business. I've got the architects sending over proposals. Forget the architects, she said, her voice dropping, becoming conspiratorial and exciting. They'll suggest something safe, a bronze statue, a sterile mobile. You need something that screams Ellison, something bold. I have an artist in mind, a sculptor from Argentina. He's brilliant, undiscovered. We could get in on the ground floor. It would be a massive coup for the artist and for us. He listened, intrigued. This was their dynamic, a seamless blend of pleasure and business. Lena wasn't just a beautiful woman. She was sharp, with an instinct for art and an even better one for commerce. She made him feel seen in a way Grace no longer did. Grace saw the man she'd married. Lena saw the titan he'd become. Send me his portfolio, Marcus said, the decision already forming in his mind. Already on its way to your private email, she said with a triumphant smile. She leaned in and kissed him, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of champagne and salt and sunshine. That's why we work so well together, Marcus. We don't wait for things to happen. We make them happen. He pulled her closer, the last vestiges of his guilt dissolving in the heat of her touch. He was the master of his universe, the architect of his own life. Everything was exactly as it should be. He was 1,000,000 miles away from the quiet penthouse, from the life he kept neatly compartmentalized. He thought of Grace, briefly, a fleeting image of her standing at the window, waving goodbye. He imagined her going about her day, her charity board meeting, lunch with her friends, maybe a yoga class. Her life was placid, predictable, safe. He was protecting her, he told himself, from the messy, complicated realities of his world. Later that night, as they dined on a private stretch of beach, the sand cool beneath their feet and a canopy of stars glittering above, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. He glanced at it, expecting market updates. Instead, he saw a photo. It was a candid shot from some society blog, taken at a luncheon Grace had attended that afternoon. She was with a group of women, smiling. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a fragility in her expression he hadn't noticed before, a shadow in the bright afternoon light. He frowned, a strange protective instinct stirring in his chest. He dismissed the notification, annoyed at the intrusion. He was in paradise. He wouldn't let the real world in. Not yet. He turned his attention back to Lena, to the wine, to the sound of the waves gently lapping the shore. He was in control. He had everything he wanted, exactly where he wanted it. It was a perfect, beautiful illusion. And like all illusions, it was destined to shatter. The first 48 hours were a blur of tears and ice cream. Grace allowed herself to wallow, to be swallowed whole by the crushing weight of Marcus's betrayal and the terrifying, exhilarating reality of her pregnancy. The penthouse, once a symbol of her success, became a gilded cage. Every object, the sleek furniture, the abstract art, the ridiculously expensive vase on the mantelpiece, seemed to mock her, each a testament to a life built on a lie. She had been a fool, a willing participant in her own deception. On the third day, she woke up and saw her reflection in the darkened screen of the television. Her face was puffy, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair a tangled mess. She looked like a victim, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. A spark of anger, hot and clean, burned through the fog of her grief. She would not be a victim. She would not be the sad, pathetic wife left behind. She was Grace Whittaker, and she was about to become a mother. She picked up her phone, her fingers scrolling past Marcus's name to find the one person she knew would understand, not with pity, but with action. Daniel Morton, her best friend from business school, a man whose loyalty was as solid as the oak desk in his law office. "Gracie, you okay?" Daniel's voice was warm, instantly calming. "No," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "But I'm going to be. Can I come see you?" An hour later, she was sitting in Daniel's office, a sleek, functional space that was the complete opposite of her own home. Daniel, with his kind eyes and sharp suit, listened patiently as the whole story poured out of her. The pregnancy, the suspicions, the gut-wrenching certainty that Marcus was not in Singapore. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. He just listened. When she was finished, her voice raw with unshed tears, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Okay," he said. "First things first. We need confirmation, not just suspicion, evidence." "How?" she asked, feeling a fresh wave of helplessness. "You're married to Marcus Ellison," Daniel said, a wry smile touching his lips. "You have resources. Hire a private investigator, a good one, discreet. We find out where he is, who he's with, and we document it. Knowledge is power, Grace. Right now, you need all the power you can get." It was the first practical step, the first piece of a plan. It felt good. It felt like taking back control. That afternoon, Daniel made a call, and by evening, a discreet, highly recommended investigator was on the case. The next step was for her. Grace went home and walked through the penthouse, but this time she saw it with new eyes. It wasn't her home. It was Marcus's. She had let his taste, his preferences, his vision of their life erase her own. She started in the closet, a vast, walk-in space filled with designer clothes Marcus had approved of, elegant, understated, and safe. She pulled them from their hangers, one by one, and piled them on the floor. The beige cashmere, the sensible navy sheaths, the muted silks. They were the uniform of Mrs. Marcus Ellison. The next morning, she went out and bought a new wardrobe. She chose bold colors, emerald green, sapphire blue, a fiery crimson. She bought a leather jacket, tailored trousers that made her feel powerful, and a pair of heels that were utterly impractical and absolutely fabulous. Then, she walked into the most exclusive salon in the city and had her long, honey blonde hair cut into a chic, sharp bob that grazed her jawline. Looking at her new reflection, confident, modern, and a little bit dangerous, she didn't see a victim anymore. She saw a warrior. Her reinvention wasn't just external. She started thinking about her career. She had an MBA, a sharp mind for strategy that she had let atrophy while she played the role of the supportive wife. She had always been passionate about sustainable architecture and urban planning, a passion Marcus had dismissed as a cute hobby. Now, it felt like a lifeline. She spent her days at the library, poring over books and journals, her mind alight with ideas. She started drafting a proposal for a foundation that would fund green building initiatives in low-income neighborhoods. The work was challenging and exhilarating. It was hers. A week after her life had imploded, the private investigator's report landed in her inbox. It was a slim digital file, but its contents were devastatingly heavy. Photos. Marcus and a stunning, dark-haired woman, laughing on the deck of an overwater bungalow in the Maldives. The resort name was watermarked in the corner. They were holding hands, kissing, their intimacy casual and deeply ingrained. The woman was Lena Hart, an art consultant who had recently done some work for Ellison Holdings. It was all there, in crisp, high-resolution color. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a fact. Grace stared at the photos, a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. But the tears didn't come. Instead, she felt a strange, chilling sense of calm. This was her proof. This was her leverage. This was her liberation. That evening, there was a charity benefit for the city's art museum, an event she and Marcus were supposed to attend together. Her first instinct was to hide, to retreat back into her gilded cage. But then, she looked at the crimson dress hanging on her door, thought of the proposal saved on her laptop, and felt the tiny, persistent flutter of the new life inside her. Hiding was what the old Grace would have done. She put on the dress, styled her new hair, and applied a slash of bold red lipstick. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger she was finally getting to know. She walked out of the penthouse and into the waiting car, her head held high. She was stepping back into the world, not as Marcus Ellison's wife, but as Grace Whittaker. And she had a feeling she was about to make an impression. The first crack in Marcus's counterfeit paradise appeared on his phone. He was lying by the pool, Lena dozing beside him, the afternoon sun beating down. He was scrolling idly through a financial news site when a pop-up ad for a society blog caught his eye. It wasn't the ad itself, but the photo in it. A woman with a sharp blonde bob, wearing a stunning crimson dress. He squinted, his mind slow to process the image. It was Grace, but it wasn't. Not the Grace he had left behind a week ago. This woman was electric. Her hair, her dress, the confident set of her jaw as she laughed with some man he didn't recognize. It was all different. She looked powerful. He clicked the link, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The blog post was about the annual Art Museum Gala. The headline read, "Grace Whittaker stuns in solo appearance." There were a dozen photos of her. Grace talking to the museum director. Grace commanding the attention of a group of the city's most influential philanthropists. Grace smiling, her eyes sparkling with a light he hadn't seen in years. There was no mention of him. No wife of Marcus Ellison. It was just her name. Grace Whittaker. A hot, unfamiliar feeling surged through him. It was sharp and possessive. Jealousy. Who was that man she was laughing with? Why was she there without him? And where did she get that dress? He had never seen it before. "What is it?" Lena's voice startled him. She had woken up and was looking at him, her brow furrowed. He quickly locked his phone, but it was too late. She had seen the flicker of emotion on his face. "Nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Just work." "It didn't look like work," she said, sitting up. "You looked angry." "It's nothing," he repeated, forcing a casual tone. But the casualness felt like a lie. The image of Grace was burned into his mind. She looked happy. She looked free. And it infuriated him. She was supposed to be at home, waiting for him. She was part of his life, a life he had carefully constructed and controlled. This independent, vibrant woman in the photos didn't fit into the box he had put her in. The rest of the day was strained. The perfect illusion of their escape began to crumble. The sun felt too hot, the turquoise water seemed garish, and Lena's easy laughter started to grate on his nerves. He found himself checking his phone constantly, searching for more news about the gala, about Grace. He felt a desperate, irrational need to know what she was doing, who she was with. That evening, at dinner, the tension between him and Lena finally snapped. He was distracted, his mind a million miles away, back in a city where his wife was apparently thriving without him. "You're not here, Marcus," Lena said, her voice sharp. She put her fork down. "You've been staring at your phone all day. What is going on?" "I told you it's work," he lied. "Don't lie to me," she shot back, her eyes flashing. "I saw the picture. It was your wife, wasn't it?" He didn't answer. He just stared out at the dark ocean. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she continued, her voice laced with accusation. "A little fun on the side, but you're still thinking about her. You want the perfect wife at home and the exciting mistress on the road. You want it all." "That's not true," he said, but his denial sounded weak even to his own ears. Was that what he wanted? He had never thought about it in those terms. He had simply taken what he felt he was entitled to. "Isn't it?" Lena laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You billionaires are all the same. You think you can buy everything and everyone. But you can't buy my time, Marcus. I'm not going to sit here and be your distraction while you obsess over your wife. I have my own ambitions." The conversation devolved from there, a toxic mix of accusations and recriminations. The clean, simple transaction of their relationship was suddenly messy and complicated. The thrill was gone, replaced by a sour, curdled resentment. Later that night, he lay awake in the king-sized bed, Lena a silent, rigid presence beside him. He couldn't stop thinking about Grace. He had betrayed her. He knew that. But in his mind, it had been a victimless crime. He had assumed she was happy in her ignorance. But the woman in those photos was not a victim. She was a force, and for the first time, he felt a genuine pang of fear. Not fear of being caught, but fear of what he had lost. He thought about their life together, the early years, her warmth, her intelligence, the way she used to look at him, as if he were the only man in the world. He had taken that for granted. He had traded something real and precious for something fleeting and counterfeit. The next morning, he made a decision. "I have to go back," he told Lena. She was already packing her suitcase. She didn't look at him. "I know," she said, her voice cold. "This was a mistake." "Lena," he started, not sure what he was going to say. "Apologize? Explain?" She finally turned to face him, her eyes hard. "Don't. Just don't. Go back to your life, Marcus. I'm going to go on with mine." She zipped her suitcase with a final, decisive sound. "And for what it's worth, she's too good for you." He watched her leave without another word. The paradise he had escaped to now felt like a prison. He was alone, with nothing but the wreckage of his own choices. He booked the first flight out, a knot of dread and a strange, desperate hope warring in his chest. He had to see Grace. He had to understand what had changed. He had to fix this. But as the private jet ascended into the clouds, leaving the turquoise water and white sand beaches behind, he had a sinking feeling that some things, once broken, could never be put back together again. The ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a galaxy of its own, a swirling constellation of diamonds, champagne flutes, and calculated smiles. Grace moved through it with a newfound sense of purpose. The crimson dress felt like armor, her chic bob a declaration of intent. A week ago, a crowd like this would have intimidated her. Tonight, she felt its energy, not as a threat, but as an opportunity. She was here not as an accessory, but as a founder. Her proposal for the Urban Oasis Foundation had caught the attention of a few key philanthropists, and tonight was her chance to turn that interest into concrete support. She spent the first hour networking, her conversation fluid and confident. She spoke about green roofs and community gardens, about sustainable housing and social impact. People listened. They were intrigued, not just by her ideas, but by the passion with which she delivered them. "You're a natural at this," Daniel Morton said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He was her escort for the evening, a steady, supportive presence. "I'm just talking about something I believe in," Grace said, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "It feels good." "Good looks great on you," he said, his eyes warm with admiration. It was then that she saw him. Marcus. He was standing near the entrance, his eyes scanning the crowd with a desperate intensity. He looked tired, his expensive suit somehow rumpled, his usual air of command replaced by a raw, uncertain vulnerability. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. The noise, the music, the chatter. It all faded into a dull hum. He started towards her, his path a straight, determined line through the sea of people. Grace felt a jolt of panic, her heart hammering against her ribs. The old Grace would have shrunk back, would have looked for an escape. The new Grace stood her ground. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne and waited. "Grace," he said when he reached her, his voice low and urgent. He looked at Daniel, a flicker of possessiveness in his eyes, before turning his full attention back to her. "We need to talk." "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice cool and even, a perfect imitation of the polite society chatter around them. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon. How was Singapore?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "Grace, please, not here." "Why not?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "This is where we live our lives, isn't it? In front of everyone." She gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom. "It's all part of the performance." He looked around, his jaw tight. People were starting to notice. Whispers were beginning to ripple through the crowd. The Ellisons, a public spat. It was blood in the water for this crowd. "What you're doing, your hair, this dress. This is all for show," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "To punish me." Grace laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "You give yourself too much credit, Marcus. I assure you, my life does not revolve around you. This," she said, gesturing to herself, "is for me. I'm remembering who I was before I became Mrs. Ellison." "You are Mrs. Ellison," he insisted, his hand reaching for her arm. She pulled back before he could touch her, her movement sharp and decisive. "Don't," she said, her voice dropping, laced with a steel he had never heard before. "Don't you dare touch me." The public smile never left her face, but her eyes were like chips of ice. She had built a wall of glass around herself. He could see her, but he couldn't get to her. He was on the outside, looking in at the life he had thrown away. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice cracking with a desperation that was utterly foreign to him. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway, Marcus," Grace said, her voice calm and cutting. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up dry cleaning. What you did was not a mistake. It was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to lie to me, to betray our vows, to disrespect me and our marriage. And now you have to live with those choices." Daniel, who had been standing by silently, stepped forward slightly, a protective gesture. "I think you should leave, Ellison." Marcus shot him a venomous look, but his focus was on Grace. He saw the finality in her eyes, the unbreachable distance she had put between them. He had come here expecting tears, recriminations, a dramatic scene that he could somehow manage and control. He had not expected this calm, collected strength, this utter indifference. "I'm not giving up on us," he said, a last desperate plea. Grace gave him a small, sad smile. "There is no us anymore, Marcus. There is you and there is me. And I'm just getting started with my life. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a foundation to launch." She turned her back on him, a simple, devastatingly final gesture. She took Daniel's arm and walked away, melting back into the glittering crowd, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the ballroom. The whispers around him grew louder, the curious stares more pointed. He was Marcus Ellison, the man who had everything, and he had never felt so utterly, publicly, and completely defeated. The glass wall was real, and he had just discovered it was bulletproof. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By the next morning, the society blog that had praised Grace's solo appearance was running a new, much juicier story. Photos of Marcus's public confrontation with his wife were splashed across the page, accompanied by speculative, venomous captions. The story was picked up by more mainstream news outlets. The narrative was clear. Marcus Ellison, the titan of industry, was not just a philanderer, but a public bully. The board of Ellison Holdings was not amused. He was summoned to an emergency meeting. The room was cold, the faces of the board members colder. They weren't concerned with his marriage, they were concerned with the brand. "This is a PR nightmare, Marcus," said an elderly director, his voice gravelly with disapproval. "Our stock took a hit this morning. Your personal life is now a liability." Priya Sharma, the sharp, no-nonsense head of his PR firm, was waiting for him back in his office. She had a stack of printouts detailing the negative press coverage. "You have two options," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. "You can hide and let this storm rage, which will cripple the company's reputation and possibly your position as CEO. Or you can get in front of it. You can own it." "Own it?" Marcus scoffed. "What am I supposed to do? Take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal admitting I'm a terrible husband?" "Close," Priya said, her expression unblinking. "You're going to issue a public apology, a real one, not some corporate speak nonsense. It needs to be humble, accountable, and most importantly, it needs to be about Grace." He recoiled at the idea. Marcus Ellison did not apologize. He strategized, he negotiated, he dominated. He did not beg for forgiveness in the public square. "It's the only way to begin to control the narrative," Priya insisted. "Right now, you're the villain. An apology makes you human. A flawed human, but one who is trying to make amends. It shifts the focus from your sins to your potential for redemption. And it shows respect for your wife, which frankly is the only thing that will make you look even remotely sympathetic right now." He spent the next 2 days in a virtual lockdown with Priya and a team of writers crafting the statement. Every word was debated, every sentence scrutinized. Marcus fought them at every turn, his pride warring with the cold, hard logic of his situation. Finally, they had a draft he could stomach. It was concise, direct, and excruciatingly honest. It acknowledged his profound personal failings and inexcusable betrayal of his wife, a woman he described as possessing a grace and integrity I failed to honor. It asked for nothing, but stated his commitment to earning back her trust. Not as a husband, but as a person. The statement was released. The media frenzy was immediate. It was analyzed on news channels, debated on social media. The reaction was mixed. Some called it a calculated PR stunt, but many, surprisingly, saw it as a genuine act of contrition. The narrative began to shift, just as Priya had predicted. The real test, however, was not public opinion. It was Grace. She agreed to meet him, not at the penthouse, but in the neutral territory of Daniel Morton's law office. She was there with Daniel, her face impassive. Marcus was there with his own lawyer, a clear sign that this was not a reconciliation, but a negotiation. "I read your statement," Grace said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It was well written." "I meant every word," Marcus said, his voice low. "I'm sure you did," she replied, the skepticism clear in her tone. "But words are easy, Marcus. Trust is built on actions." She slid a folder across the polished mahogany table. "This is what I want." It was a co-parenting agreement, a treaty for their new reality. It was detailed, clinical, and left no room for ambiguity. It outlined financial support for the child, a clear custody schedule, and mandatory co-parenting therapy. "You want us to go to therapy?" Marcus asked, surprised. "I don't want us to do anything," Grace corrected him. "I want you and me to learn how to be effective parents for our child. I want to have a third party in the room to ensure that our conversations are productive and respectful. Our child deserves two parents who can be civil to each other, even if they can't be married." She had one more condition. A trust-building KPI, as she called it, borrowing the language of his world. A key performance indicator. "For the next 6 months, you will do exactly what you say you are going to do, every time. If you say you will call at 7, you will call at 7, not 7:05. If you agree to a decision about the baby, you will not try to change it later. You will be consistent, reliable, and transparent. No excuses. No exceptions. That is the only currency that has any value to me right now, your word." Marcus looked at the document, at the clear, unyielding terms she had set. This was not the emotional, tearful confrontation he had braced himself for. This was a business negotiation, and Grace was in complete control. He had no leverage, no power, no choice. He thought of the baby, the innocent life that was coming into this mess he had created. He looked at Grace, at the strong, determined woman she had become, and felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. He picked up a pen. "I agree to all of it." He signed the document. It felt less like a defeat and more like the first, terrifying step on a long, uncertain road. The public apology had been for the world. This private treaty was for her. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was the only one that truly mattered. The first therapy session with Dr. Elena Alvarez was excruciating. The room was decorated in soothing shades of blue and grey, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Marcus found himself reverting to his default setting, the CEO in a negotiation. He spoke of optimizing outcomes and strategic co-parenting frameworks. Dr. Alvarez, a woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel, was not impressed. "Marcus," she said gently, "this isn't a boardroom, and Grace is not a subordinate you need to manage. This is about learning to communicate with honesty and vulnerability. Can you try telling Grace how you felt when you saw the first ultrasound picture, instead of discussing the logistics of the nursery? He faltered. He had seen the photo. Grace's lawyer had sent it to his, a clinical, black and white image. He had stared at it for a long time, a profound, aching sense of loss washing over him. He had missed it. He had missed the first flutter, the first heartbeat, the first sign of the life he had helped create. I felt, he started, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. He looked at Grace, who was watching him, her expression unreadable. I felt like I had missed the most important moment of my life, and I was angry at myself. It was a small admission, but it was real. Grace didn't respond, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a crack in the wall of ice between them. He threw himself into fulfilling the terms of their agreement with the same relentless drive he applied to his business. He was on time for every call, every appointment. He read every parenting book Grace suggested. He was consistent, reliable, and transparent. He was trying to rebuild a skyscraper of trust with one brick at a time. The real test, however, came not from his past, but from his future. An opportunity arose, a massive, legacy-defining deal to build a new sustainable city in the desert. It was ambitious, visionary, and incredibly lucrative. It was also ethically compromised. The lead investor was a foreign conglomerate with a notoriously poor record on labor rights and environmental regulations. To make the deal work, Marcus would have to look the other way, to compromise the very principles of sustainable and ethical building that Grace was now championing with her foundation. The old Marcus wouldn't have hesitated. He would have seen it as the cost of doing business, a necessary evil on the path to greatness. He would have rationalized it, compartmentalized it, and signed the papers. He found himself in a late-night meeting with his board, the pressure immense. They saw the deal as a lifeline, a way to erase the stain of his personal scandal with a spectacular professional victory. "This is a game changer, Marcus," a board member urged. "We can't let some minor ethical concerns get in the way of this kind of opportunity." Marcus looked at the contract, at the billions of dollars on the line. He thought of the man he wanted to be. He thought of the father he wanted to be. He thought of the look on his child's face, years from now, if they were to discover he had built his legacy on the backs of exploited workers. Then a new player entered the game, Lena Hart. She had resurfaced, now working as a consultant for the foreign conglomerate. She requested a private meeting with Marcus. They met in a sterile hotel bar, the air thick with unspoken history. "It's a good deal, Marcus," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You and I, we could do great things together. We still can." She was offering him a way back to the man he had been, powerful, decisive, and unburdened by conscience. She was temptation, wrapped in a designer suit. "You're right," he said, looking at her. "It's a good deal. For you. And for the old me." "And what's wrong with the old you?" she asked, a challenge in her eyes. "He was successful. He was powerful. He was empty," Marcus said, the truth of the words hitting him with surprising force. "He had a portfolio, not a life." He stood up. "I'm walking away from the deal, Lena." She stared at him, shocked. "You're a fool. You're throwing away a fortune." "I know," he said, "but I'm trying to gain something back that's worth more." He walked out of the bar, leaving her and the billion-dollar deal behind. The next day, he announced to his stunned board that Ellison Holdings was passing on the project, citing ethical concerns. The move was risky. It angered investors and caused a temporary dip in their stock price. But it also sent a powerful message. That evening, he got a text from Grace. It was the first unsolicited message she had sent him in months. It contained a link to a news article about his decision, with the headline, "Ellison Holdings puts ethics before profits." Below the link she had written 2 words. Good choice. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was a brick. A solid, heavy, load-bearing brick in the foundation of trust he was so desperately trying to build. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Ellison felt like he was building something that might actually last. The nursery was painted a soft, calming shade of sage green. A simple modern crib stood against one wall, and a comfortable-looking rocking chair was positioned near the window. The late afternoon sun streamed in, casting long shadows across the floor. The room was quiet, filled with the scent of fresh paint and the promise of a new beginning. Grace stood in the middle of the room, her hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby was due in a few weeks, and the reality of it was both terrifying and wonderful. She had done this on her own. She had built a new life for herself and her child, piece by piece. Her foundation was thriving. She had a network of supportive friends, and she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. The doorbell rang. It was Marcus, arriving to drop off a box of baby clothes his mother had insisted on buying. It was part of their new routine. Civil, structured, and carefully managed. He came into the nursery, his presence still filling a room in a way that was both familiar and foreign. He looked different now. The hard, arrogant edge was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful demeanor. There were new lines around his eyes. "The room looks great," he said, his voice soft. He placed the box on the floor. "My mom went a little overboard, as usual." "It's sweet of her," Grace said. They stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the unspoken history between them, a tangible presence in the room. Marcus walked over to the window, looking out at the same city skyline that graced the view from the penthouse he no longer shared with her. "You know," he said, his back to her, "I used to look at this city, and all I saw were assets, buildings, properties, deals to be made. My reflection in the glass." He turned to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "Now, I just see a place where my child is going to grow up. I think about playgrounds and schools and which parks have the best swings." He took a hesitant step towards her. "I know I can't undo what I did, Grace. I know I broke us, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But I want you to know, the man I am now, the man I'm trying to be, he would never have made those choices. He would have chosen you. He would have chosen our family. Every single time." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, hot and unexpected. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, but of a complex, bitter-sweet release. The apology she had always longed for, not the public statement, but this quiet, honest confession in a sunlit nursery. "I see you trying, Marcus," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I see it." He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between them, not daring to touch her without permission. With a small, almost imperceptible nod, she gave it. His fingers gently brushed her arm, a touch that was tentative and full of reverence. It wasn't the possessive touch of the old Marcus, but something new. A question. A hope. There was no magical kiss, no fairy tale reunion. The chasm between them was too wide, the wounds too deep to be healed in a single moment. But for the first time, a fragile bridge of understanding stretched across the divide. They were 2 different people now, forged in the fire of betrayal and reinvention. "We're going to be good parents," Grace said, her voice a little stronger. It was both a statement and a prayer. "Yes," Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers. "We are." The future was unwritten. Their love story might be over, but a new story, one of co-parenting, of forgiveness, and of second chances, was just beginning. It wouldn't be a life of perfect, gleaming surfaces, but one of messy, complicated, and ultimately more beautiful truths. Love, Grace was beginning to understand, wasn't a destination. It was a choice you made every day. And in the quiet of the nursery, with the city humming below, they both chose to begin. What a journey of heartbreak, reinvention, and redemption.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.